Okay. Oh, and then the beginning is that painting, right? That one image of that. Great. Yeah. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Are y'all good?
Uh, Me? Yeah.
Okay,
Am
good.
I, oh, yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm Ben Hickey. I'm curator of exhibitions, and I host the creative conversations here. Um, it's my extreme pleasure to have Sam Reveles here with me for a wonderful conversation this evening. Um, Before we begin, there's also one bit of housekeeping. We'd like to thank Maison Mouton Bed and Breakfast for their sponsorship, for their support, for hosting Sam.
Yeah.
He's had a wonderful
I
time.
want to thank them too. Yeah.
It's support like that that makes projects come alive. So it's really meaningful to us for their support. I'll begin with a brief bio, just to give a little context for Sam, and then we'll move on to our conversation, if that's okay. Um, Sam Reveles is an El Paso, Texas native. He earned his MFA in painting from Yale University. And throughout his career, he has explored the expressive possibilities of line and space to create abstract responses to familiar visual stimuli. In the early years, these stimuli were master paintings from the canon of art history, For the past decade, Reveles has drawn inspiration from the landscapes to which he is intimately connected. Over the course of his career, he has participated in many important solo and group exhibitions, such as the prestigious Whitney Biennial in 1995. Most recently, he was featured in a solo exhibition at the Butler Gallery, the nonprofit contemporary art space of Kilkenny Castle in Ireland. Reveles has had solo exhibitions at the El Paso Museum of Art, the St. Louis Art Museum, the Contemporary Arts Museum Houston, the Hammer Art Museum in Los Angeles as well. His paintings are also included in the permanent collections of the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Dallas Museum of Art, the St. Louis Art Museum, the El Paso Museum of Art, and Centro del Arte Contemporáneo in Mexico City. He was recently awarded a residency at Ballinglen Arts Foundation in Ballycastle, Ireland, and he currently lives and works in County Wicklow, Ireland. So thank you for being here tonight, Sam.
Thank you. Thank you. Just a minor correction. I didn't have a one-person show at the Hammer. It was a group.
It was a group. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry,
it was
a group show.
So, but that'd be nice. Yeah, be nice. But
I'll write some emails on your behalf. We'll talk after. So as we're planning for this, there was an interesting moment where you're like, I know where the paintings I'm working on now started, which is very rare for someone with a creative practice to say, there's a definitive moment where things crystallized. And so I'd like to share that work, Expanse Horizon from the Impossibility of Measuring Our Connectivity in 2016. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is a little loud. Yeah. I was working on an exhibition at the time, and so I was working on all these paintings. They're very similar to this. The palette was very reduced. It was all, they look gray, but they were all very color saturated, but not, actually very little black and white. The grays came from color. It came from, but anyway, I was working on all these paintings. I had a deadline because the exhibition was coming up, and the last painting that I was working on was this painting. And so I'm working on it, and it got to the point where I was like, okay, I think it's finished, I think it's done. And it's pretty much as you see it. And I sat with it, and I'm going, I really wanted it to be done because I needed it to be done because I had a deadline. And then I realized, it's not done. I really don't. And then I said, I really don't like the underpainting. The color that was the underpainting under all the line work, I wasn't happy with. And then I realized I think I just had like 2 or 3 weeks, and I said, I either bin it and just start over, or change the color, the underpainting color. I'd never done that before. And I said, I'm gonna try that. I'm gonna go out and get like tiny brushes and basically paint what's between the lines. So that's what I did. So I spent like I don't know, 2 weeks painting between the lines. So in other words, it's almost like painting a tree, but not painting the tree, painting the sky. And then you're left with a tree. And so that's what ended up being the painting. And I really liked it, but it got me thinking in terms of my own work. My own work before was very linear, as you see, and it was almost like it was almost like a document of like confrontations with the painting over and over again, like a dialogue with the painting that just like accumulated. So it was all very accumulative. This painting got me thinking about the space between the lines, basically the nothingness between the lines. And that, after this painting, it opened up a whole other way of working on my own work and looking at my own work. So I was considering the line, but it was, anyway, it opened up that whole way of working. I even, you know, like my tools changed, my brushes changed, a lot of things changed. So anyway, that's why I thought it was interesting to start with this, because that opened up basically the work downstairs, and since then I kind of have gone kind of back and forth with it. But yeah.
Well, and one thing you've mentioned, as your work progresses, you'll go back and look and say, why didn't I pursue this one element as opposed to the one I did end up pursuing? So I guess the thought process, my question for you as a result of that is, how do you view bodies of work as lines of demarcation within your practice? Is that kind of artificial after the fact, or, you know, how organic or non?
You know, a lot of it is very organic. There's sometimes you have the benefit of accident. There's certain parameters that I will, like strategies that one imposes, but I always like to be surprised with my own work. And that, I think, is the hard part, to let it kind of go and let it be something that you yourself weren't even expecting, and going with it. I've kind of learned to sort of do that. I also, it sounds kind of crazy, but I've also learned to kind of, or try to not have a memory of what I did yesterday or what I did the day before, so that when I look at the painting, I want to feel like I'm looking at it for the first time, and then confront it, and then see like, okay, what do we have here? This is what we have. And that also has to do with not making the painting so precious. Because if you've been working on a painting for like 3 weeks or 5 weeks, sometimes it's hard to mess with it or to change it. So I try not to have that memory, and just, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, you know, and you go, well, I don't want to treat it that preciously. I'm just gonna, if I'm gonna do a line, I'm gonna just, you know, obliterate it, basically.
Well, and you know, that I feel like with the most recent work, the Solastalgia work, in particular, I perceive the formal attributes of the work. It's hard to tell whether the work is coalescing into something or disintegrating.
Yeah.
And so, you know,
I like that dynamic of something that is either about to become something or is collapsing. That tension there, I really like that, as opposed, so yeah.
And that has been something that, at least to my eye, it seems like something that you've been working through since at least 2016 with Expanse Horizon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so
but even aspects of it, even before then, even though the work looked very differently, it was still that kind of collapsing. It was, I mean, more so now.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And so, looking at the work, how you've always been responding to place. You know, I feel like now you're responding to place perhaps in a very specific way, but place has always been an important factor. You know, and we kind of have the slide deck arranged just for reference, and it's in chronological order, but how has the notion of responding to a place or a culture been important to your compositions, your work?
You know, a lot of times with that, it's like, some of it I can't control. You know, I'm out somewhere and a lot of it is unconscious. But in terms of place in the paintings, I think the canvas itself or the object itself becomes kind of a metaphor for place. And that's where I start, in a way, kind of, before I start painting, I start kind of mapping the area that doesn't make a lot of sense. But I start kind of specifying the space of the canvas, because for me, the canvas, I usually ask myself, like, well, like, what's motivating you to work on the canvas? The canvas doesn't need you to do it. Like, it's already nice. It's a white canvas. It's beautiful already. Like, what are you doing? Like, what are you? So I'm an avid hiker and I spend a lot of times outdoors. And so, I don't know, it sounds kind of maybe a little, I don't know, pedestrian or something, but I literally, the way you move through space, I try to do something similar on the canvas, where if you walk from here across the street, well, you don't walk in a precise way. I mean, there's going to be gravel, there's grass, you're going to go, there's a tree in the way, so you have to go around the tree. So you start having obstacles. And before this, early paintings, I was outlining obstacles that were in my studio. Like, I trace a tool, the bottom of a can of paint. And then I would start moving, and it would have its own logic, the way I was moving in it. Like, well, I can't go that way because there's a circle there that's the paint, so I have to go around it and then continue. And it started making an interesting image. And so now well, as the photo shows, at first I was working on the image before that. I was working on the mapping. I was using freehand, like I would freehand lines, but I was also using straight lines from like a 2x4 or whatever piece of wood was in the studio. And they're straight-ish, but they're not absolute straight, you know. And I liked that they weren't necessarily that straight. It evolved into using, the way I kind of started a way of inserting myself into them was with that that's called an expandable curve. I used my own body. The curves of my body, my head, or friends, Patrick's in them, and a cat I traced a cat. Now they've gone very kind of, I don't know, vegan. They've gone I'm fascinated by, I live in this amazing area that's very rural, and I'm tracing vines, I'm tracing tree branches. So the curves that you see downstairs in the paintings are all coming from either my body or someone's body, but most of them are coming from plants. It sets up a whole, like, I would never have come up with that on my own. All the mapping of it, and then it becomes, once you do the mapping, well, then you have then you have to deal with what you're going to do with all that. Then you have the painting, and a lot of the color comes in, which is again nature-based.
Well, they do seem, surprisingly organic. From that standpoint, and it's this kind of intuitive, intrinsic quality that you can feel that they're coming from nature in some way, but it's unclear. And so, being able to intuit or take that from a painting is really interesting. It's a satisfying experience being out in nature. And another point of conversation we've had is these kind of parallel and sometimes intersecting paths of, taking from a painting what you put into it, what you see in it, but then also to what degree is a notion of art history or criticism playing into it as you're either making the work or after the fact. And so to what degree is kind of, what's that push and pull like if we're talking about kind of an image coalescing or disintegrating, what's intrinsically in the painting from the making and what's in there from like a foundational or historical standpoint? Sorry.
I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that would be. I mean, of course, in the studio, you have a lot of voices in your head, and you try to, eliminate, not think about them, and just kind of, deal with what's in front of you. I have to say, I'm not thinking of, like, in the long sense, I'm not really thinking of art history necessarily, or where these fit in. I suppose maybe I should be thinking about that. That's not. Yeah,
well, I think it's background noise.
Very strong. Yeah.
I
mean, I'm aware. Like what's.
You had spoken about being really impacted yesterday in class, actually, with the seniors, about being really impacted by, kind of walking into a Rothko exhibition, not knowing anything about it.
Yeah.
And it being a seminal moment and kind of leading you down this path of painting.
Yeah. No, I think it's well, because I don't know. I guess we all are informed to a certain sense. I think it's very magical when you see something that you just do not know anything about, that you're seeing it raw without any kind of history about it or any kind of preconceptions or notions about it. You haven't read any of nothing. You just see something and it moves you, it stirs you, and I find that really great. And I find that because I'm so well traveled and well informed. No, I'm joking about that. Because I see a lot of things.
I am too. Let's
because
go.
Because I see a lot of things. It's harder to have that kind of raw experience, and I really like that when you go somewhere and you go like, you see something and you go, wow, I don't know this work, and it's who is it and what how. Yeah, I really put a lot of value into that.
Well, and so we have discussed this, and you've said another very definitive thing to me, that your paintings are not landscapes.
Yeah.
They're not landscapes. So can you, and I think you've alluded to this, can you tell me maybe what they are if they are not landscapes? I'm sorry, it's
that's
so
a hard question. Yeah.
tonight.
No. I mean, no. I mean, they're like, say, this painting is not a specific place or something. It's a conglomeration of different experiences or different, So I don't know. I mean, I think that I'm very involved with how like landscape is very important to me, but it's almost like about how one sees landscape, how one creates, like how you create an image out of landscape, how you see it. And it's almost really about seeing. You can see a landscape, and you see the landscape, you see an image, and whatever, mountains. And I'm fascinated by the breakdown of it. Like you see it, you approach it, and then it breaks down. The bush breaks down into its smaller parts, into leaves. And then you look more, and it breaks down even more. And then you look harder, and then it breaks down even more. And that idea that I, and I think that if the work becomes an experience of seeing the way one would see like a raw piece of nature, I think, and how it affects you, psychologically and spiritually and all of that. I think that would be a great hope of mine, that the work becomes that kind of experience,
It's very granular.
About seeing and, seeing it from a distance, you see some things, and then you get up close, and then it breaks down. Yeah.
Our educator and our graduate assistants have been doing this as exercises this week, where we've been looking at different distances and moving closer and moving closer and moving closer to get that kind of looking experience.
Yeah.
And I find that to be really rewarding and and eventually really thought-provoking as well.
I'm also I'm very interested. I'm not I'm fascinated and drawn by writings about the cosmos and the universe, but quantum physics, it just goes over my head. A lot of the scientific, but I'm fascinated by that, and I'm fascinated by space and the idea that space is not homogeneous. If you travel through space, different things affect it. There's gravity, there's light, there's temperature, there's black holes that are going to bend things. And so in the work, in the initial mapping of the paintings, some of the lines really concentrate, and then some open up. And I think that's my way of making that space kind of correspond to something like that, where something gets very concentrated on the surface, and then something is more open. And how a similar thing reacts to when it's concentrated or open. I'm fascinated by articles about dark matter, and how scientists don't know what it is really, but they know how it affects other things.
Yeah.
They know it by how it affects other things, but they don't know what it is actually. And then I've noticed that there's also particles that I've read about that exist in one way, but then they also exist in another way. And I don't know, I think that's really fascinating to me.
Yeah, particles can be a wave or not.
Yeah.
Well, and so then thinking about how one thing can affect another, the exhibition title, Solastalgia, Glenn Albrecht, he's a philosopher, and he coined that term, combining the words nostalgia and solace to kind of elicit a sense of distress caused by changes to people's homes as a result of climate change specifically. And so, that's kind of at least for this exhibition, the concept driving all of the imagery, all of the work. But you've been very careful to say in our conversations, like, you don't consider yourself an activist. And actually, we talked about this with Kei Ito, because Kei also doesn't view himself as an activist, maybe for different reasons than you, but I find it really interesting to, you know, you're commenting, and can you kind of delineate the you know, this kind of notion that you're documenting and you're not necessarily an activist?
Yeah, well, I came across the term because there's this author, his name is Robert McFarlane. He's an environmentalist, naturalist. He's also a terrific writer. He was actually on the board of the Booker Prize, if you all know the Booker Prize. He was like on the board for many years. I came across his writings many years ago, and I've read several books. The latest book is where I came across the term solastalgia, which is, it means like like you said, it means like an existential anxiety about changes to your environment. And our environment is, well, it's basically the earth. It's our world, and that's our home. It's specifically our home here, but it's the earth, and so yeah, I came across the term, and I was fascinated by that, because I mean that's obviously that's what we're dealing with, and that's a real kind of it's kind of very well. It's become like this existential, you know. How should I say, well, questioning with what we're doing ourselves, where we place ourselves within this, you know, within this. And as far as activism, I mean, I'm not advocating that you know, get electric cars or, you know, do this, but I think everybody, I would hope, you know, thinks about it and approaches it in their way, because it's undeniable. I mean, it's a real thing that we're facing, and I think everybody has their approach to it, or, you know, certainly you can't deny it, you know.
Well, and I feel like you've documented this process in the context of northern landscapes most recently and most passionately. So what is it that's so captivating about thinking about this in the context of a northern landscape, and how's it compare to El Paso?
Well, you know, it's very interesting, but I was recently in Iceland for the first time, and we went to the painting. There's no more than four paintings downstairs. They're called Gullfoss, which is the Golden Falls in Iceland. The landscape was very unfamiliar to me, and Iceland also had that feel of like a land that was, to me, generally, it felt like a land that was about to collapse, or a land that was about just being made. There was all this volcanic, volcanic like energy there, and then these falls, and I don't know, the whole, it just brought up that whole kind of, you know. And in the book that I told her where I first came across the term solastalgia, he talks about hiking or exploring. I can't remember the name now, but they're holes that are developing in icebergs because they're melting. There's these holes that develop like very deep. I can't remember what they're called, but people are, you know, there's explorers, or well, he explored some with a guide. Well, they're beautiful. You see that really blue, that ice blue. There's this amazing blue hue that is in. So you're seeing all this stuff, but like you should, like these are existing like in our time. They weren't existing before, you know. Yeah. So yeah. Something.
Well, so, you know, speaking about kind of having a thorough understanding of that kind of context, literature also, you know, as you've kind of illustrated with McFarlane, literature has played an important role in your life. And, you know, since we're talking about Iceland, can you tell me about Arnaldur Indriðason and his novels?
Yeah.
I have other things to tell, other novels,
well, he's
other literature, but I think is an important tool for understanding that you know.
I was interested in going to Iceland, and in preparation, because I also like reading a lot of crime, not exclusively, but I do like crime novels. And I said, I'm gonna explore, because I want to go to Iceland and get the feel of what it's like living in Iceland or a day in Iceland. I want to see if there's any crime writers in Iceland. Of course there are, you know. So anyway, this guy's a crime writer, Icelandic. So I think I've read all the books he wrote. But it gave me a sense of being there, like the everyday, you know, just everyday society. So yeah.
And I think that is a wonderful juxtaposition, because it grounds the profound nature of what you're experiencing in glaciers and waterfalls, and looking at that stuff. It grounds it in reality. So, you know, it's like it's a fun thing to think about Icelandic crime novels as a resource, but I really value it in our conversation as thinking about a grounding presence.
Well, you get a sense of society, how it's built, and just, you know, the everyday, the kind of mundaneness of it. And
And you know, a similar thing, like you repeat yourself in this wonderful way, you know, and so Dubliners, as James Joyce's Dubliners, is a kind of a moment that is relatively important to you early in life, that has informed your passage through life.
Yeah, well, that goes. In high school, I got a copy of Dubliners, which I read in high school. West Texas, El Paso, you know, whatever. I read Dubliners, and it just like, I thought, like I was mesmerized, like the language and all these funny characters, and just read it. I remember back then thinking like, wow, this is kind of cool. I wonder if I'll ever go to Ireland. I wonder if I'll ever explore that or find out what it, like I wanted to find out more. Yeah, but it just sparked an interest in my mind. It just sparked, I thought the language was very funny, and not funny, but like it's odd. Yeah. And of course it has to do with, in Ireland there's you know what if they're speaking English, you know what they're saying, but like there's a lot of things that are directly translated from the Irish. So things are said in a different way that you would normally say them, because they're coming from the Irish. Yeah, because they're coming from like that, and not
absolutely,
and not English. So I find that fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, it almost the same part in our, you know, within 5 years of each other in our stages of life. Like I read Dubliners, and I found that to be a profoundly motivating thing for me, so I don't get stuck in a cycle. And you know, it did make me also curious about the world from the standpoint of characters that are stuck. And so, you know, I feel great kinship now with you and your work, because we're literary buddies. But you know, the final kind of point of inquiry I have for you before we open this up to Q&A would be, how does your relationship to El Paso now kind of play into this?
Well, I don't know.
It's okay to say it doesn't.
The landscapes are so, they could not be more opposite. Obviously, the West Texas desert, sparse, and then Ireland. They could not be more opposite. But I think, I mean, obviously, it's like my partner is Irish, and I'm sure that me in Ireland, I'm noticing things in Ireland that I think Irish people might take for granted, or I'm seeing them maybe a little fresher. Mm-hmm. And I know that when because we've explored the Southwest, Arizona, like the Southwest, the West a lot. I know he notices things in that landscape that I might have taken for granted or overlooked or something. He subtleties that that are fascinating to him, like tumbleweeds. Like, I'm going like...
They're invasive from Russia. I just found that out this year. It's crazy.
It's called a Russian thistle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like the 19th century.
He'd never seen tumbleweeds. He thought they were fake. He thought they were just like in the Westerns, like props, like to make it look interesting. And I'm going like, but then if you look at them, they're kind of fascinating. I mean, they're kind of, Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But I think it keeps things fresh in terms of looking at different. I really appreciate the landscape in both places, and I have to say that in Ireland and in the West, there's places that I'm out there. We're out there at weird times of day or whatever, and I'm pinching myself, going like, look at this. Look at this. This is like it's unbelievable.
Yeah, like Bryce Canyon, Mount Zion, name it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Before we geek out about just places we've been that we like, if anyone has a question, please feel free to raise your hand, and I'll come with a mic so that we can record your voice for posterity. As it's very important. So. Do we have any takers? Are there any curious people in the audience?
How did you end up at Yale to get your MFA? And how did your work, how was it impacted by that geographic location, your perception of the way that you feel in regards to your artwork? And what did you learn from your classmates, and how did that impact you as an artist? Sorry, that's a lot, but there you go.
Yale for me was, I think, it was really tough, as my fellow Yaley friend can attest to. Like, it was tough. For me, the best thing was that I was in El Paso, Texas, and, not great museums. I mean, they're not, you're not like in LA or Houston and I had never been further east than Houston. So Yale to me opened up, the school was important, but for me personally, it opened up a whole, I'd never been to the Met. I don't think I'd ever seen a Van Gogh painting in person. I'd never seen a lot of paintings in person. I'd seen a lot of paintings in magazines. I was from a small town, very isolated. So it kind of opened things up for me. And I had made assumptions about work based on magazines and photographs. And with artwork, it's so important to see the real thing. I had made assumptions about someone like Barnett Newman, his paintings, and Jasper Johns, and I liked some and I didn't like, whatever. when I saw them in the flesh, I'm going like, wow, this is not, like I was feeling things that, like it wasn't what I imagined. So it was an education just going east, you know, that maybe Yale got me there, but it didn't necessarily have to do with Yale. It had to do with, you know, me going in New York. But that's part of education, you know, it's like
absolutely.
you're exposed to, and then you learn a lot from your fellow student, you know, the people you're studying with, you know.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Several painters I know have one problem. When can they stop?
Yeah. Are you asking me when do I stop? Yeah.
When is the painting finished?
Yeah. Well, that's the $1 million question, you know. I think when it takes me aback, when I'm kind of surprised by it, that I'm looking at something kind of maybe new or different or something that it, you know, like something unexpected or just, you know, something raw that I can kind of re-experience or something like that. Yeah, I don't have a very clear answer, I know, but something like that. Yeah.
Well, we had another interested party. Oh, no, he's still there. Oh, see, told you couldn't.
Sam, this goes back to the question that the woman had about the East Coast. How'd you get from Yale to New York? I don't even know that answer. And I've been here
Yeah.
for 30 years.
I always knew that after I graduated, I wasn't that interested in teaching. And I knew, just intuitively, I knew I wanted to live in the city. I wanted to experience the city. Yeah, I wanted it to be more than just me visiting New York City for the weekend and leaving. I wanted to be there. I wanted to, and you know, I was ambitious, and I said, you know, if you're a young artist, that's what you need to do, you know. If I had been an actor, of course, you're at Yale, you got to go to New York or LA, you know. I mean, the choices are like, it's kind of what you want out, you know, it's what you're looking at if you want to. Huh?
Did you know that when you went to PA? Did you at some point say, I'm going to New York halfway through the program, or?
Yeah. I mean, I did. After Yale, the idea of going back to El Paso never occurred to me. Like I was not going to go back to El Paso. I was going to go to New York. I didn't even want to go to LA. And I lived in LA as well. I was at UCLA for like 3-4 years. So I was familiar with LA. But yeah, I wanted to go to New York. I thought that's, yeah.
All right,
I wanted to be part of it.
It looks like we have 2 final questions, or maybe 3.
Just curious, Iceland, Ireland, and you said the West, a lot of natural spaces. Have you ever encountered any weird, spooky, like Fae type experience? I know in Ireland and Iceland, there's a lot.
Fairies, I think.
Oh, fairies. Yeah. You know, in Ireland, it's funny that I find it interesting. There'd be, and you can attest to this, farmers will have a field that they plow. But there's a mound over there that they don't plow. And they don't flatten it to make more field. That mound is there because it's sacred. They believe that, I don't think they believe in like leprechauns or anything. like that. But they believe that, and it's not a Catholic thing either, we're not going to mess with that, just in case. You know, it's like, so they're, and children are it's very common that you might find, and this is just like a children's thing, that you might go on a walk and you're walking through the forest and you'll see a tree, and in the tree, a child has carved or made a little doorway and put it in the tree, because that's where the leprechauns live. In fact, there's where we just moved, there's a walk that's really cool, and anyway, part of it, it's all these forests, and I think a class came in of children. And there's all these trees with little houses where all the little people live, you know. And there's names on them, you know. And so it's cute, but it's cute, but I think people respect it somehow. They do, and there is the thing about Ireland is that it does go back. It does go back to prehistoric times. I mean, there is, you know, you can't take it lightly. You know, there are areas that are, like I've been to areas that are, you know, that are, like Tara is a sacred area. And you go like, okay, well, this is a ceremonial site. But then you're walking around and you go like, it makes sense. Up here, it feels very differently. Like it's not an accident. It's not accidental. It was very, it makes sense. And you do, I have to say that you do feel a kind of spirituality when it's, you know, when it's attached to nature or geography. Yeah. But no, I haven't seen any fairies or, you know. Yeah, and there are a lot of rain, because it's so wet and rainy. You do see a lot of double rainbows. And you know, one thing I'm fascinated with is someone told me, well, so in Ireland they were telling me, like, well, Sam, have you ever seen a black rainbow? And I'm going like, a black rainbow? What? I think I have actually though, but it's a rainbow where the spectrum, the warmer spectrum is not there. So you're just getting the cooler spectrum. You're getting the, you know, greens and blues and ultraviolets. I think I have seen it, you know. And that's, I mean, well, that's just nature. You know. Anyway.
Yeah. Hi.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you think it means today to be a painter? Or how do you interact with this question how did you interact with this question through the year?
It's not something I think about, like, you know, every day, or like I'm a painter or what, you know. I think it's so open, you know, there's so many different kinds of painters. I know maybe part of it is like, a lot of it, or, you know, maybe there's all this, you know, like painting maybe is not in the forefront of things, you know, there's all this new media and works that are media-based or installation or temporal or so, you know. I think there's always a place for painting, you know. But it can't,
It's to be respected, much like the landscape you talked
well,
about.
I would say, I mean, but it's so varied. I mean, I can't even talk about it generally, you know. Different people are doing, you know. I was recently, for the first time, I'd never been to the Venice Biennale. And I saw, well, the Venice Biennale was on. But congruently, there was an Anselm Kiefer show at the Doge's Palace. if you know his work, they're like, you know, amazing, big historical paintings, it's huge. They knocked my socks off. It was like so amazing that, you know, and it's painting. And I even made a comment to somebody like, you know, if I had not seen the biennial and just seen the Anselm Kiefer show, that would have been fine. I don't want to put anybody down in the biennial or speak of them less or anything, but it was just so moving and you know, yeah. But, you know, I mean, a lot of things are like that. I mean, it could be photography, it could be a lot of things, you know. I don't know. It's, you know, I don't know. It's,
Yeah, I have a question, maybe more of a comment. When I first heard about your show and thinking about solastalgia, which is something that I deal with in my own work, I thought that, you know, I always associate solastalgia with a kind of crisis and catastrophe. But your work doesn't have that sense for me. In fact, some of it feels expansive and even cheerful with the colors. And I think as a photographer, I always want to make a kind of landscape out of things. So I appreciate you talking about how the landscape is not really, you're not a landscape artist. But when I look at your art, I feel like there is something that's expanding, but there's also something that's collapsing in it. It's a kind of entropy too.
yeah.
And maybe that is a way for us to understand solastalgia as a kind of collapse, like the idea of the bees population collapsing. And I just wondered if you could talk about that idea of entropy or collapse or expansiveness in how you make your compositions or think about making a painting.
Right. Well, it's, you know, I agree with what you're saying. But I think it's also, you know, what I was saying about looking at the falls and you're looking at something that's, you know, very kind of beautiful, but then there's this anxiety about it, like it shouldn't be this way, and I know in walks that I take or wherever, you know, you could see, you know, these beautiful plants or whatever, you know, mountains and whatever, and there is that anxiety, you know, of how it's being affected by climate change, and you know, I mean, I also know that say for instance, I mean, and this, I'm sure you've read about this, where like in the north of America, like, you know, New York and stuff, and further north, that they're experiencing, like, trees are getting diseases that they wouldn't normally get because it's always so cold. The winter kind of wipes out certain diseases that are not typical of the north are climbing up and affecting the trees. Insects that wouldn't normally survive in a certain, you know, are now surviving, and so that has an impact on, you know, so.
And this is the last question. Thank you, everyone, for participating and asking great questions. It's almost, now it's verging on, we're over time, but I thought we'll end with Mary.
No, it's just, I've known Sam for like over 30 years, and to me the one consistent thing he does is he'll make a painting, and then he'll kill it and bury it, and then he resurrects it. And so like the yellow painting downstairs, to me is a prime example of you. I can remember a period where you painted a bunch of like saints, and then you obliterated them, and then he pulls a painting out. So I think some of it is like what Linda's talking about. You know, it's like this landscape, but it's like I've seen you where you have to like take it and then you have to take it down. And now you're telling me basically you're painting the back spaces out. So you're resurrecting it that way. Another time, like that yellow painting, you've got it layered and layered and layered. And it's like, trust me guys, there's probably 20 paintings under there. And And then
Yeah.
it finally comes out, it's this yellow painting, and it's resurrected.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you would speak about, that process, because I think for students,
Yeah.
process is what takes you hours and hours in your studio. It's not
Oh.
just like, oh, I'm gonna make a painting about this.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like there's a process.
Well, there's a body of work that I made, and this might kind of illustrate an idea about it. What I was doing was, I can hardly remember, but well, anyway, what the paintings were was I was basically copying old master paintings, and because I thought the like moving through the canvas as you would through landscape, I go, well, what if you actually move through a real landscape, like a painted landscape, like a medieval landscape, or Giotto with moving through. So I was getting these paintings, a lot of Flemish paintings. I have to say I love especially Dutch and Flemish paintings. So I was spending a lot of time basically copying them, and I got pretty good at it. They were like, if you came to my studio at some point, it looked like a different artist was in there, like these old master paintings. But I wasn't doing, of course, all the layering of paint and everything. They were almost like grisaille, like in grays, like I was putting, but I was spending a lot of time on them. And but then I would work on top of that with color. I go, well, what if this was red, this was pink, and I start moving in my mind, I thought the same energy that makes a tree, or the same energy that makes a mountain or a rock or whatever, could be transformed into just like a blob of paint, or a smear of paint. So what you saw in these paintings, in the end, what they look like is there was all this paint on them, like just like these marks and paint. But then you'd see like a tree or something over here, or like a donkey's head coming out over here, or a foot of a saint or something. And they were pretty good. I thought they were pretty good. But a lot of times after I would do the old master copies, I'd go like, God, I've spent a lot of time on this. Am I really going to like paint over this? Which is basically kind of what I was doing. So, but I would, and then it would become a third thing. It would become something that, anyway, I couldn't have imagined or something, But it was about, I think in my mind, it was about transforming the same stuff that makes a tree trunk or a foot is the same stuff that makes a blue or an area of color. I think that's how I was, yeah. Because it's the same stuff. I mean,
Absolutely,
a
yeah.
Rothko is oil on canvas. A Van der Weyden is oil on canvas. It's just, it's just, well, it's very different handling and everything, but it's the same stuff, and there's that magicalness that happens with how you do it, how you handle it,
Absolutely. Well, Sam, thank you so much for sharing this evening with us. I really appreciate it, and thank you everyone for attending tonight.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.